Alistair Harlow had spent 12 years serving in the Special Air Service to protect the most sacred things. But he never expected that his most ruthless enemy was waiting for him right at home. As his mud-stained combat boots touched the tarmac at RAF Brize Norton, instead of his wife's warm embrace, Alistair received only a brief message that tore through every hope. "Don't come home. The locks have been changed. The children don't want to see you. Everything is over." Amidst the cheers of hundreds of families reuniting around him, the soldier stood frozen like a forgotten monument in the cold drizzle of Oxfordshire. Alistair did not scream, nor did he plead. He simply typed 3 simple but lethal words: "As you wish." It was not an acceptance of defeat, but the starting code for a brutal campaign of reckoning that his betraying wife had never dared to imagine. The real war was only just beginning. He threw his duffel bag over his shoulder, feeling the weight of 12 years of sacrifice denied in a single second. Victoria, the woman he loved deeply, had chosen the exact moment he set foot on British soil to deliver a fatal blow. Alistair did not return to the villa in Surrey, where he was no longer welcome. Instead, he hailed a black cab and headed straight for central London. His destination was not a luxury hotel, but the office of Fiona Sterling, the lawyer known as the Ice Queen of the UK divorce world. During 4 years of service in the most dangerous war zones of the Middle East, Alistair had learned to pack his emotions into tight compartments in exchange for absolute clarity. In an office overlooking the River Thames, he faced Fiona. She looked at him, a man with a weathered and somewhat rugged appearance, easily underestimated as someone who only knew how to hold a gun. But she recognized the true power hidden behind those cold gray eyes and unusual composure. Alistair demanded the nuclear option to begin the divorce. He had spent years studying his wife's family financial structures and trusts as a tactical hobby during long nights in the barracks. He discovered a legal loophole that even Victoria's expensive lawyers had missed. By casting him out the moment he returned from duty, Victoria had inadvertently triggered a special asset protection clause, allowing him to freeze her entire trust fund by the next morning. After renting a small hotel room in Shoreditch, Alistair made a second strategic call to Callum Davies, a former comrade now running a private security firm. He needed the rawest facts about what was happening inside the house he had bled to pay for. At exactly 10:37 p.m., the first investigative photos were sent to his phone. A man named Sebastian Vane, a slick real estate broker with a flashy appearance, was embracing Victoria right on Alistair's porch. That intimacy was not a budding romance, but the trace of a relationship that had lasted for months. Alistair put his phone down, feeling a terrifying calm spread through his veins instead of the usual rage. The next morning, at exactly 9:17, his phone exploded with a series of calls from Victoria's lawyer, Pemberton. He screamed through the phone that freezing the trusts was dirty, illegal blackmail. Alistair simply listened to those hollow threats in silence, and then slowly hung up. 19 missed calls appeared like clear evidence of the panic overwhelming the opposing side. Phase 1 of the campaign was perfectly complete. Alistair stood by the window looking out at the rushing crowds below, a cold smile flickering on his lips. He had returned home, not to beg for forgiveness or pity, but to take back everything that belonged to him with the absolute precision of a Special Forces soldier who never knew failure. The lives of Victoria and her lover, from this moment on, had officially entered the destruction zone he had established. Sebastian Vane thought he had closed the deal of a lifetime by stealing the heart of a wife and the estate of a soldier away on duty, but he did not know that Alistair Harlow had begun to weave a net from which no prey could escape. In his minimalist Shoreditch apartment, Alistair sat quietly in the darkness, the only light coming from 3 computer screens, reflecting off his sharp, cold face. Callum Davies entered, placing a portable hard drive on the table with a dry click, the former comrade's smile carrying the icy edge of years spent fighting in the Special Air Service. Alistair did not look up, his fingers gliding across the keys as if he were piloting a combat drone. Callum cleared his throat and reported that the tracking device Alistair had secretly installed on the family Land Rover Defender had worked perfectly. showing that Victoria's travel route over the past 6 months frequently stopped at private law offices and luxury apartments in Mayfair. Alistair's intelligence network did not stop at location tracking. He had activated all his old connections from his time at the Ministry of Defense to peel back every layer of Sebastian Vane's cover. The information pouring in caused Alistair to clench his fists until his knuckles turned white. Sebastian was not the successful real estate broker his polished exterior suggested. In reality, this man was a financial parasite who specialized in hunting wealthy women in vulnerable psychological states. He had graduated from Oxford University, where he was Victoria's ex-boyfriend before she married Alistair, and now he had returned to execute a perfect replacement campaign. Callum pointed to a heat map on the screen, showing that Sebastian had used a shell company called Vane Holdings to buy the property right next to the Harlow estate 14 months ago, exactly when Alistair had started his final mission. Fiona Sterling sent Alistair a copy of Victoria's declined bank transaction report. She had tried to transfer £150,000 as a deposit for the Algarve retreat project in Spain, but the entire limit had been frozen. Alistair listened to a recorded call Callum had intercepted from Sebastian's cloud surveillance system, where the lover was frantically reassuring Victoria that this was just a minor technical glitch. Victoria's voice on the recording was filled with fear and impatience, a completely different image from the arrogant woman who had sent the message to kick her husband out 24 hours ago. Alistair felt a bitter satisfaction spread through his veins, but he knew these were only the harassing shots outside the outpost. The pace of the story quickened as Alistair discovered a shocking detail in Sebastian's confidential files. He didn't just want Victoria's assets. He was plotting to use her family's name and unofficial titles to secure bank loans for ghost projects, after which he would disappear to the Mediterranean, leaving Victoria and the children to face massive debts and the total collapse of their honor. Sebastian was playing an international fraud game, and Victoria was just a sacrificial pawn he was ready to discard. Alistair took a deep breath, sensing the familiar scent of betrayal and danger as if on a battlefield, and he ordered Callum to prepare long-range eavesdropping equipment and access to security cameras at the private clubs in London where Sebastian frequently visited. That night, while Victoria and Sebastian were raising their glasses to celebrate what they thought was a new beginning at a high-end restaurant in Chelsea, Alistair sat alone with a bottle of cheap whiskey, but his mind was sharper than ever. He thought of his two children, Toby and Imogen, whom Victoria claimed did not want to see him. A dull ache tore through the soldier's cold exterior, but he quickly transformed it into the motivation to fight. He remembered the silent agreement made 12 years ago with Victoria's father, a man who respected military discipline and always suspected his daughter's frivolous nature. That agreement was the final trump card Alistair held, a testament to the true power he had quietly protected for over a decade. At exactly 11 p.m., Callum sent a video showing Sebastian whispering into another man's ear about accelerating the liquidation of assets within the next week because he felt the heat coming from Alistair. Sebastian thought Victoria's military husband was just a brute, easily bullied with tedious divorce procedures, but the fraudster had no idea he was facing a master of psychological tactics and staged ambushes. Alistair stood up, walked to a large map hanging on the wall, and marked a red X right over the location of Sebastian's office in central London. He took out his ceremonial dress uniform, stroking the medals of honor with unusual reverence. He did not wear it for vanity. He wore it to remind himself and the world who he was, and what price he had paid to protect those who were now trying to destroy him. Tomorrow, Sebastian Vane and Victoria would realize they were not just facing an abandoned husband. They were facing the judgment of a soldier who never knew how to surrender. The silence of the London night suddenly became terrifying, like the pause just before a heavy artillery strike begins to level everything in its path. Alistair smiled, a smile that did not reach his ash-gray eyes, because he knew this mission would end exactly the way he had decided, as they wished, but at a price they had never been strong enough to pay. The persistent drizzle of Surrey covered the Stanhope estate in a gray shroud as Alistair Harlow moved through the dark garden with the absolute silence of a Special Forces ghost. He did not need a flashlight or a map, because every tree and trail here had been etched into his memory over the last 12 years. While Victoria and Sebastian were busy flaunting their wealth at a charity auction in Mayfair, Alistair was conducting field reconnaissance at what used to be his home. He entered through the back door using a set of keys Victoria believed were useless after she changed the entire security system. Alistair stood in the vast living room, a wave of nausea rising as he realized the house had become terrifyingly foreign. The warm leather sofas he had personally chosen were gone, replaced by sharp modern furniture in cold gray and steel blue. The family photos holding memories of 12 years of marriage had been removed, replaced by soulless abstract paintings. Victoria did not just want him gone, she wanted to erase every trace of his existence from the children's minds. Alistair moved toward the study, where secrets were hidden that he needed to turn the tide of the game. Behind an old portrait of the Stanhope family was a wall safe that only he and Victoria knew the code for. He slowly turned the dial to the birth date of his eldest son, Toby. A soft click echoed, the steel door opening to reveal spiritual treasures he had left behind before his last deployment. Inside were his grandfather's medals from the Second World War, discharge papers, and a wax-sealed envelope. Alistair only took the single envelope and closed the safe. Just as he was about to leave, his eyes caught a stack of documents on Victoria's desk. It was a detailed architectural plan for the merger of the Stanhope estate with Sebastian Vane's neighboring land. Alistair used his phone to photograph every page with absolute precision. These drawings were dated 14 months ago, meaning only 4 months after he began his final mission. This betrayal was not a spontaneous moment of weakness, but a meticulously and ruthlessly staged plan from long ago. Before leaving the house, Alistair stopped in front of the children's rooms. Toby's room still held a familiar mess of video game posters and sports equipment. On the boy's desk, Alistair froze when he saw a single small photo frame left in the entire house, showing him and Toby on a fishing trip 3 years ago. Both were smiling brightly, and it was the clearest evidence that Victoria had failed to brainwash his eldest son. In contrast, Imogen's room had completely changed, decorated in the mature, high-class style that Sebastian favored, making it look more like a college student's apartment than a 14-year-old girl's room. On his daughter's bulletin board, Alistair saw photos of Imogen with Victoria and Sebastian at a ski resort in Switzerland. They looked like a perfect family, and his absence in those moments was like a knife through the soldier's psychological armor. He placed his house key back on the marble kitchen counter strategically, right where Victoria would surely find it tomorrow morning, so she would understand that no security system could stop his footsteps. The next morning, Alistair met Arthur Bentley, a former intelligence officer, now a top private investigator in London. He needed a full file on Sebastian Vane, not just the successes in the newspapers, but the dirtiest hidden corners. Arthur nodded in agreement and promised to go to the very bottom of the truth. While waiting, Alistair took the next step in his campaign to regain his son's trust. He contacted Toby's rugby coach and arranged a chance meeting after practice at the local club. When Toby walked out of the gym with his shoulders slumped in exhaustion, the boy stopped dead when he saw the familiar figure of his father leaning against the Land Rover. "Dad," the teenager's voice broke with shock. "Mom said you were never coming back." Alistair stepped forward, placing a hand on his son's shoulder and feeling the boy's trembling. "I am here, son, and I am not going anywhere." Toby looked away, eyes filled with hurt and anger, saying that Mom told him he had chosen the military over the family, that he wanted a clean break without messy goodbyes. Alistair kept a calm expression despite the rage swirling inside, asserting that he never said those words and would always be his father, no matter what happened between him and Victoria. They talked for 30 minutes, Alistair careful not to badmouth Victoria, but skillfully helping Toby realize that many of his assumptions were based on lies. As Victoria's SUV pulled into the parking lot, Alistair stood up and told his son to hold on to his character as a man. Toby called out as he walked away, asking if he was going to let Sebastian take everything. Alistair turned back, his gaze as sharp as tempered steel, confirming that he would not let that happen. That night, Arthur Bentley brought shocking preliminary findings about Sebastian Vane. He was a professional predator, targeting wealthy women whose husbands were often away for international business or military service. He became a friend, a confidant, then a business advisor to gain access to their family assets. 3 of Sebastian's previous business partners had suddenly sold off their shares at low prices after he stepped into their families. Alistair realized that Sebastian intended to isolate Victoria, taking her and the children to Spain, where UK financial regulations no longer applied, so he could swallow the massive trust fund. In the envelope Alistair took from the safe was the final trump card, a notarized agreement between him and Victoria's father before he passed away, pledging to protect Alistair's assets from any infringement in case of divorce. Alistair called Fiona Sterling and announced he was ready for the face-to-face meeting tomorrow. Victoria had a timeline to escape, but Alistair Harlow had a campaign to ensure every step she took led to the destruction of her betraying lover. The London night fell with misty layers of fog shrouding the red brick buildings of Shoreditch, creating a gloomy and foreboding atmosphere. Alistair Harlow sat quietly by the window of his 5th-floor apartment, his eyes reflecting the yellow streetlights below, while his mind reviewed every detail of the operational plan just as he had before a raid on an enemy stronghold. The doorbell rang urgently and out of rhythm at 11 p.m., immediately putting him on high alert. He moved toward the door with silent steps, but as he looked through the peephole, the stone heart of the SAS soldier suddenly tightened. Imogen stood there, her 14-year-old hair matted with rain, her eyes swollen from crying, and her whole body trembling in a thin jacket. Alistair opened the door and pulled his daughter inside, wrapping her in the warmth he had long yearned to share. "Mom doesn't know I'm here," Imogen sobbed. "Toby helped me escape through the bedroom window." Alistair did not ask why. He simply made a cup of hot tea and waited until his daughter's sobs subsided. Imogen looked at her father with eyes full of resentment mixed with pleading, asking why he hadn't fought for the family, why he had disappeared right after returning from the battlefield. Alistair knelt before his daughter, feeling a surge of regret as he realized how deeply Victoria's lies had carved into a young soul. "I was told that you children didn't want to see me," Alistair said in a deep, warm voice that carried a heavy truth, "and I believed that until I met your brother this afternoon." Imogen stared at her father, admitting that Sebastian had told them he no longer cared about the family, that he wanted a new life without the burden of a wife and children. But that was not the worst part. Imogen's voice dropped to a trembling whisper as she recounted what had happened at the estate in Surrey last Thursday. Mom wasn't home, and Toby had argued with Sebastian because he wanted to remove the last of Alistair's merit certificates in the study. Sebastian had lost control, cornering Toby and squeezing his arm so hard it left distinct finger-shaped bruises. Alistair felt the blood in his veins suddenly turn as cold as Arctic ice. A dark rage he had carefully suppressed for 12 years was now poised to explode. He had touched his son. That financial predator had crossed the final line that no soldier could ever tolerate. Imogen continued through choked tears that Sebastian frequently said insulting things about her father when their mother was away, calling him a failure who only knew how to kill and had no place in the high society world he was building for them. He said that if Toby and Imogen didn't accept reality, they would be sent to distant boarding schools abroad, so their mother would no longer have to worry about them. Alistair gripped the teacup in his hand so hard his knuckles turned white, realizing that Sebastian didn't just want Victoria's money. He wanted to break the children's will so they would become compliant puppets in his plan to escape to Spain. Alistair took a deep breath to steady his heart rate, assuring Imogen that from tomorrow, everything would change completely, and he would not let Sebastian harm anyone ever again. After asking Callum Davies to secretly return Imogen home safely to avoid Victoria's suspicion, Alistair returned to his desk with a completely different mindset. He was no longer just a betrayed husband seeking simple justice. He had become a hunter, closing the circle around a wild beast. Alistair made a final call to lawyer Fiona Sterling at 1 in the morning, announcing that the situation had escalated and they needed to double the pace of the purge. He provided Fiona with information about Sebastian's violence toward Toby, an invaluable legal detail that could completely strip away Victoria's advantage in child custody. Fiona confirmed that with this evidence, they could request an emergency protection order at the upcoming meeting. Alistair opened the wax envelope he had taken from the safe in Surrey. Inside was the original military asset protection agreement he had signed with Sir Edward Stanhope, Victoria's father, 12 years ago. Sir Edward had foreseen his daughter's frivolous and easily manipulated nature, giving Alistair an extremely powerful legal tool to ensure that the funds he accumulated from dangerous missions would never be taken by Victoria in an unfair divorce. Alistair smiled coldly, realizing Victoria was completely unaware of this agreement's existence. She thought he was just a rugged soldier with a modest bank balance, but the truth was that Alistair had quietly built a financial foundation strong enough to destroy Sebastian Vane's entire ambition. He no longer felt the pain of betrayal, replaced instead by the intense focus of a sniper aiming at a target from 1,000 meters away. Sebastian Vane and Victoria had underestimated a soldier who had survived the world's deadliest lands, and that would be their final mistake. Alistair stood up, packed the documents, and looked at the small photo of Toby and Imogen in his wallet, the promise to protect his children echoing in his mind like an unbreakable oath. Tomorrow, the velvet curtain of lies would be torn apart, and Victoria's entire world would realize they had provoked a man capable of turning their every wish into the most realistic nightmares. The coming London dawn would bring a ruthless purge where justice would be executed in the manner of an SAS operator, swift, precise, and absolutely without mercy. The Shard stood tall in the heart of London, like a giant glass arrow piercing the gray morning mist. In the executive office on the 27th floor, the space was filled with cold light reflecting from polished chrome surfaces and tempered glass, creating an atmosphere of pressure and high class. Sebastian Vane sat back in an expensive leather chair. His long legs crossed arrogantly, his handsome face showing clear triumph as he saw Alistair Harlow enter. Accompanying Alistair was Fiona Sterling, the lawyer who remained remarkably calm like an iceberg in the middle of the ocean. Across the table, Victoria sat next to lawyer Pemberton, her eyes avoiding her husband's piercing gaze, her hands tightly interlaced showing clear insecurity despite her attempts to look magnificent. Sebastian began with a fake patronizing tone, saying he greatly appreciated Alistair's pragmatism in accepting to sign this quick divorce agreement. He pushed a check for £1 million across the marble tabletop, declaring it a generous compensation so Alistair could start a new life and disappear completely from Victoria's life as well as the children's. Alistair stared at the check but did not touch it, his gray eyes cold as tempered steel. He asked Victoria if she really wanted him to sign, and she only gave a slight nod, whispering that everything should end here for the sake of everyone. Sebastian smirked, thinking this rugged SAS soldier had finally been subdued by the power of the British pound and social status. Just as Sebastian was about to hand the gold pen to Alistair, the meeting room door opened once more. Fiona Sterling stood up with a suggestive smile and introduced an uninvited guest she had arranged in advance. It was Agent Donovan from the National Crime Agency, the NCA. The smile on Sebastian's lips suddenly froze, his complexion turning from rosy to pale in a single second when he saw the badge and ID placed on the table. Alistair Harlow only then slowly stood up, true power radiating from his upright stance, making everyone in the room feel breathless. He was no longer the pitiful abandoned husband, but the predator enjoying the moment. The prey was netted. Fiona began launching devastating and meticulously prepared legal attacks. She distributed files recording details of a transnational financial fraud network operated by Sebastian Vane for 7 years. The Algarve retreat project in Spain, which Sebastian used to lure Victoria into investing £1.5 million, was actually just a barren plot of land worth less than £80,000. All the luxury perspective images and architectural drawings Sebastian presented were products of manipulation and stolen from other projects. Victoria trembled as she flipped through each page, her breathing becoming rapid as she realized the money from the Stanhope Family Trust had been secretly moved by Sebastian through a series of shell companies abroad. But the true climax of the purge erupted when Alistair slid a photograph across the table toward Victoria. It was the photo of Toby's arm with the distinct finger-shaped bruises Imogen had recounted. Alistair spoke in a low, husky voice that contained the fierce rage of a father, stating that Sebastian had touched his son and that was his final mistake. Victoria turned to look at Sebastian, who was now fumbling for an explanation that it was just a small misunderstanding while educating the boy. A resounding slap tore through the silence of the meeting room as Victoria's palm struck Sebastian's face with all her resentment and shock. Sebastian screamed that this was a dirty blackmail trap, but Agent Donovan cut him off by announcing a formal arrest warrant for securities fraud and conspiracy to illegally disperse assets. 2 security officers entered and led Sebastian away to the amazement of everyone. Victoria collapsed onto the table, her shoulders shaking in shameful sobs. She asked Alistair why he saved her after all she had done to him, and Alistair only replied coldly that he didn't save her. He was only protecting the children from a predator and defending the family honor he had spent 12 years preserving. He stated that despite her betraying the vows, he was still an SAS soldier, and his rule was never to leave anyone behind in danger, regardless of whether they deserved it or not. The meeting ended as Alistair and Fiona walked out of the Shard, leaving Victoria alone to face the ruins of the illusions she had built herself. Alistair looked at the London sky, feeling the burden of the last 12 years finally lifting. The most difficult phase of the mission was complete. Sebastian Vane had been eliminated from the game and his children were now safe. However, instead of a feeling of triumph, Alistair's heart was left with a deep emptiness. He had won the financial and legal battle, but the emotional wound Victoria caused was still there, lingering and aching. He needed to go home, to Toby and Imogen, to begin the process of healing the cracks left by betrayal. Victoria might have lost all her money and her lover, but Alistair knew that the greatest punishment for her was having to live her whole life in regret for losing the only man willing to sacrifice his life to protect her. The purge at the Shard was not just a legal victory. It was a steel-like affirmation of the character of a soldier who always masters the game, no matter how scheming and ruthless the enemy. Alistair Harlow's true dawn was only now beginning to emerge, dispelling the darkness of the days of deception to head toward a freer and more authentic future. 6 months have passed since the legal storm at the Shard swept away the lives of Sebastian Vane and Victoria Stanhope. The landscape of Alistair Harlow's life has been completely transformed. The 8-year prison sentence for Sebastian at Belmarsh Prison is a fitting end for this financial predator, along with massive compensation payments that will leave him facing destitution for decades to come. Victoria has now moved out of the once magnificent Stanhope estate to a modest small apartment in the suburbs. Her reputation as a top barrister has collapsed, forcing her to work at a minor law firm to make ends meet. Meanwhile, Alistair's security consulting firm has expanded rapidly. He has gathered 2 more former comrades from the Special Air Service, creating an alliance of elite soldiers providing security solutions for major corporations in central London. On a warm spring afternoon at the local stadium, Alistair stood on the sidelines to watch the regional youth rugby final. Beside him was Imogen, the 14-year-old girl cheering enthusiastically for her brother. On the other side of Imogen, Victoria maintained a respectful distance from Alistair. She dressed much more simply than 6 months ago, no longer in expensive designer clothes, but just a simple jacket and jeans, her face showing clear signs of exhaustion, but also looking more authentic than ever. They stood there as a united front for their son, but the invisible boundary between Alistair and Victoria was something they both understood deeply. "He's really got talent," a feminine voice spoke beside Alistair, just as Toby made a spectacular scoring run. He turned and saw a dynamic woman with curly brown hair observing the match with professional interest. "I'm Vanessa, a talent scout for a top sports academy in London," the woman introduced herself. Alistair smiled and introduced himself as the father of the player wearing number 17. Their conversation flowed naturally and comfortably throughout the first half. Vanessa's knowledge of rugby truly impressed Alistair. When halftime arrived, Imogen pulled Alistair away to get drinks, not forgetting to give her father a suggestive wink toward the stranger. After the match ended with a breathtaking victory for Toby's team, the family had a brief but meaningful talk right on the field. Victoria asked to speak privately with Alistair while the children gathered their things. She looked around at his new life and admitted that the children were happier than they had been in years. Victoria offered him her most sincere apology, not in legal terms, but with the regret of a mother who almost lost everything to her own vanity. Alistair looked at the woman he once loved deeply, feeling his anger had faded, replaced by a strange sense of serenity. He accepted her apology for the sake of the children, but affirmed that their marriage was a closed chapter that could never be opened again. That night, after celebrating the victory with Toby and Imogen, Alistair returned to his quiet home. He placed the business card Vanessa had given him on his desk, not yet ready to make the call, but no longer rejecting new possibilities for himself. His phone buzzed with a message from Victoria, saying that Toby wouldn't stop talking about the woman at the field, and the boy seemed to be planning another wedding for his father. Alistair laughed out loud in the darkness, a feeling of relief he had missed during 4 years of warfare. He messaged back briefly that he would manage those expectations and thanked her for coming to support their son. It was not a reconciliation, but an acknowledgement that they had moved through the war zone into an independent future, yet still linked by their love for the children. Early the next morning, Alistair woke before dawn to start his routine jog. As he tied his laces, he glanced at Vanessa's card once more and decided to put it in his wallet. The war is over. He had protected what mattered most and upheld the principles of a Special Forces soldier. He stepped outside, feeling the fresh morning London air fill his lungs. Alistair Harlow thought about the first message that had started it all, the day he was kicked out of his own home. His answer then was, "As you wish." And now, he realized that very acceptance of the challenge had led him home in the truest sense. The battle was won, the mission was complete, and now, for the first time in years, Alistair Harlow truly felt free. The story of Alistair Harlow's reckoning and steadfastness ends here. A soldier may be betrayed, but their character is something no enemy can take away. What do you think about Alistair's final decision not to return to Victoria, even though she was truly remorseful? Should forgiveness have limits? Please share your thoughts in the comments below so we can discuss them together. If you love dramatic and meaningful stories like this, please hit the like button and subscribe to the Ethan Stories channel to support us. Don't forget to click the bell icon to receive the earliest notifications for our next videos. Thank you for your presence and time, and I will see you in the next stories where justice and truth are always honored.